Smoke fills a passenger plane 10 kilometers in the sky.
We're on Mayday. We are going down.
Electrical systems shut down as the smoke spreads. The crew tries desperately to land their stricken plane.
We're gonna need an emergency landing. Put your head on your lap.
We're going to need fire trucks. They're standing by for you.
What seemed like a small problem at first has become a life-or-death struggle for everyone on board Air Canada Flight 797. Early evening, June the 2nd, 1983. Supper time aboard Air Canada Flight 797. Captain Donald Cameron has been working for Air Canada for 17 years and has flown almost 5,000 hours on a DC-9. But it doesn't mean he gets to eat first.
How was your seafood? Nice?
Before he can dig in, his first officer, Claude Ouimet, will have to finish.
Good.
The jet is in the middle of a flight from Dallas, Texas to Montreal with a stopover in Toronto. The heavy cloud cover below hides some light showers, but at their cruising altitude of 10,000 meters, the view is clear and bright. The DC-9 is only half full today, with 41 passengers scattered throughout the plane.
Can I have some tea, please?
24-year-old Diane Fadley is an active member of the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation.
We have a number of different fundraising activities, and once a year they have a large conference, and at this time it happened to be in Toronto.
Raymond Chalifaux is 23 and recently married. An engineer, he's returning home from his first ever business trip.
It was a little bit frightening both for me and for my wife. I was supposed to be gone 4 or 5 days, so first time we were separated for a long period of time, so it was kind of insecuring for me, yeah.
And a few rows further up sits a growing legend in the world of folk music. Stan Rogers is just 33, but his career is beginning to take off outside of his native Canada.
I think Stan's best-known songs celebrate ordinary people. The songs are really about ordinary people rising to the occasion and becoming heroes on their own.
Just before 7 o'clock, the plane is a little more than halfway to Toronto.
What was that? It's right there, I see it. Right there.
Yeah.
3 circuit breakers have popped out. Like fuses, they protect delicate electrical circuits on the plane from becoming overloaded.
Like a machine gun.
Yeah. Zap, zap, zap.
The 3 breakers are for the flushing motor in the toilet at the rear of the plane. Cameron decides to give them a few minutes before he tries to reset them again.
You know, sometimes it overworks and overeats, and then the breaker popped, and then it cools off, and then you push the breaker and everything is fine. So put the snag in the logbook, and that's it.
Someone must have pushed a rag down the toilet or something. Jammed it and it overheated.
Cameron thinks that something must be stopping the motor from working properly. But it's not an emergency. Toilets get blocked all the time. Several minutes pass as the plane continues on its way to Toronto. Flight attendants Laura Kayama and Judy Davidson are busy serving up dinner in the cabin. In the cockpit, it's Captain Cameron's turn for dinner. But first, he wants to reset the 3 circuit breakers. Without them, the toilet won't work. The rest of the flight could get uncomfortable for the passengers.
Pop says I push it.
He's given it more than 8 minutes. But whatever is wrong with the washroom, it isn't fixing itself. In the cabin, one of the passengers complains about a disturbing odor.
Yeah, that is a strange smell. Let me take a look.
Connie Kirsch, a Texan headed for a business meeting in Toronto, is seated at the back of the plane.
I had smelled a peculiar smell where I was sitting. And it struck me as odd. Actually, it was a wiry smell. It wasn't a smoke smell.
A wisp of smoke is leaking out of the washroom. The smoke and the acrid smell of burning plastic takes Davidson by surprise. This is much more than just a clogged toilet. Other passengers are beginning to notice the smoke and the suffocating smell.
Sergio, there's a problem in the washroom. Judy says there's a fire.
Okay, I'll be right there.
Chief Flight Attendant Sergio Benetti is in charge of the cabin crew.
As a precaution, we're moving everyone to Rosa.
The smoke is noxious and overpowering. Benetti can't see any flames. He sprays the fire extinguisher into the tiny washroom, trying to coat every surface.
As soon as I saw that fire extinguisher, something went through my mind. There's definitely something wrong. The guy seemed to have the thing under control, so he's gonna do his job and things will be business as usual.
It's 2 minutes past 7, just 11 minutes since the circuit breakers first popped out. Laura Kayama brings Captain Cameron the disturbing news.
Excuse me, Captain. There's a fire in the washroom in the back. They just went back to go put it out.
You want me to go back?
Yeah, go.
A fire on board an aircraft is one of the worst situations any crew can face. The plane is some 10 kilometers high. What starts as a spark can turn deadly in a few short minutes. But at the moment, Cameron doesn't know how bad the situation is.
You got to remember, in 1983, people were allowed to smoke in the aircraft. And there had been a number of incidents of this sort of in the industry. So it really didn't alarm me that much.
Ouimet finds the situation is worse than he expected.
I didn't see any flames when I opened the door before, but I sprayed it really good with the fire extinguisher.
You think it was a cigarette in the garbage?
No, not really.
Okay. Can't get back there. Smoke's too heavy. I think we'd better go down.
But Flight Attendant Sergio Benetti has a very different assessment of the situation.
You don't have to worry. I think the smoke's easing up.
It's a confusing moment for Captain Cameron.
Some components do fail from time to time that are not severe or serious enough to cause an emergency descent. That's a pretty serious thing.
When Ouimet and Benetti were at the back of the plane, the smoke seemed thick, but now it appears to be subsiding.
Okay, it's starting to clear now. But I'll go back and check if that's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Take these goggles. I'll leave my mask on. Go back wherever you can, but don't get yourself incapacitated.
No problem. No problem.
If it's just a broken toilet motor, Cameron can still make it to Toronto. But if it's more serious, he'll have to land immediately before the small inconvenience becomes a deadly problem. June the 2nd, 1983. Air Canada Flight 797 cruises through the early evening. The flight has taken an unsettling turn. Wisps of smoke are gathering at the back of the DC-9. An acrid smell is spreading through the cabin. The crew is growing concerned. They've already moved passengers towards the front of the jet, as far as possible from the creeping smoke. Captain Donald Cameron is waiting for an update from the back of the plane, when suddenly he's got a new problem. The master warning light is on. Electrical systems throughout the plane, including some in the cockpit, begin to fail.
The airplane basically lost all its sophisticated navigation and attitude information. So I was left very suddenly with, I think, 3 engine instruments per engine and 4 flight instruments, which were very primitive. They were what you might have flown a World War II bomber with.
With his electrical systems starting to shut down, Cameron calls the nearest ground control.
Memphis Center, this is Air Canada 797.
Air Canada 797, Indianapolis Center. Go ahead.
Yeah, we've got an electrical problem here. We may be off communication shortly. Stand by.
Co-pilot Claude Ouimet is at the back of the plane. The washroom door handle has become hot to the touch. He doesn't even risk opening it. Faced with a potential fire on board, the crew have no choice but to land their plane as soon as possible.
I don't like what's happening. I think we'd better go down. We're going to be making an emergency descent. Brief the cabin crew. Yes, sir.
As soon as the decision is made, another warning light goes on. They've just lost most of their emergency power.
We're talking about multiple failure here, and it's starting to be complicated. So we're going down, and obviously we have to land.
Mayday, Mayday, Mayday.
A small problem has snowballed into an all-out emergency.
Mayday, Mayday, Mayday.
This is Louisville Control, over.
Air Canada 797, we have a fire on board. We are going down.
Can you possibly make Cincinnati?
Roger that.
Cincinnati is 46 kilometers away. They can make it. Captain Cameron begins an initial descent to 1,500 meters. The crew has switched to emergency battery power, but many of the plane's instruments aren't functioning.
So all we had left was DC immer power, and that's only good for radios, basically.
It's not only instruments. Cameron finds that a critical piece of his plane isn't working properly. The horizontal stabilizer on the tail of his DC-9 is frozen. Cameron uses the part that's still working, the elevators, to make the plane dive. But like a car that's lost power steering, the aircraft resists. As Cameron pushes on the controls, they push back with a pressure equal to 20 kilograms.
The airplane became very heavy, and I took my total concentration to fly the airplane.
An acrid, bitter smoke is creeping forward from the back of the plane and seeping in from the seams in the fuselage ceiling. It hovers like a cloud over the passengers' heads.
Incredibly harsh smoke that was really irritating your throat. You had to take really, really small breaths, otherwise you would choke.
I could see it rise. It was traveling along those luggage racks, you know, coming forward.
The smell of burning plastic fills the air. Dropping oxygen masks could make the situation worse.
I could have deployed the oxygen mask for the passengers, but it's forbidden. You're only allowed to use the oxygen mask in the case of a massive decompression or loss of cabin pressure, not for fire.
I was crying and scared. I wasn't hysterical. The gentleman sitting next to me explained to me that if I would not cry and if I could, you know, conserve my, not breathe so fast, that it would conserve the oxygen, would help us, and not to worry, that the flight attendants, they really know how to handle these sort of situations.
As the electrical malfunctions ripple through the plane, the PA system shuts down. Flight attendants struggle to shout directions, but it's getting more and more difficult to breathe. In 1983, it's not standard procedure to tell passengers how to open the emergency doors. But in this case, the two flight attendants are taking no chances.
The plane is possible.
As smoke begins entering the cockpit, the captain's situation is becoming critical. For the first time, Ouimet talks to the Cincinnati airport.
Approach, Air Canada 797. We're on Mayday. We're going down.
Air Canada 797, Cincinnati approach. Plan runway 36, ILS. And the equipment has been alerted. Do you have time to give me the nature of the emergency?
We have a fire in the washroom. We're filling up with smoke right now.
Say, type of aircraft, number of people on board, and amount of fuel.
We'll copy that later. We don't have time.
Gregory Karam is the approach tower controller. He's the lifeline for the struggling jet. He can't see the plane on radar yet, but he knows it's in trouble.
There was really no mayhem whatsoever, no screaming, nothing at all. In fact, it was very quiet and calm. And again, I was terrified at that point.
Almost 13 minutes after 7, Karam catches sight of Flight 797 on his radar.
Air Canada 797, you are now fully identified. This will be a no-gyro radar approach for runway 27 left. Descend now to 3,500 feet. Your position is now 12 miles southeast of the airport.
The crew needs to be guided in from the ground. Struggling to see through the dense smoke, they could easily veer off course. Karam will talk them down, watching them every step of the way. In the cabin, the smoke and heat are becoming unbearable.
My thought was, well, we're gonna crash. They won't be able to identify myself because I didn't have my papers with me, so I stood up, I took my wallet in the compartment and put my jacket on so that they could identify my buddy.
I knew at that point, that's when I decided, or felt that I was not going to make it because I felt I would never see my family again, and the situation just seemed very impossible.
Stan certainly had a sense of his own mortality, and he hated to fly. But the demand for Stan was growing, so he was flying more often. And he certainly had a sense that with so much traveling, his risk is elevated.
Where's the airport?
12 o'clock and 8 miles, Air Canada.
Okay, we're trying to locate it. We're going to need fire trucks.
They're standing by for you. Can you give me the number of people and amount of fuel?
We don't have time. Getting worse in here.
Understood, sir. Turn left now. You are 1/2 mile north of final approach.
Finally, the crew see the airport.
Okay, we have the airport.
The tower has you in sight. You need not acknowledge further transmission from the Air Canada 797. You are cleared to land. You are 4 miles from the airport. Good luck.
In a thick haze of smoke and soot, flight attendants Laura Kayama and Judy Davidson feel their way along the aisle, trying to reassure the passengers. They can't get past the 12th row. The smoke and the heat are overwhelming.
I was praying the whole time. Dear God, please help us land this plane. Please get this plane safely on the ground. Can't see, can't breathe, deaf, absolutely crossed my mind. But hang in there, don't give up.
I've been married for less than a year, and it's already over. So I started breathing as little as I could and start thinking seriously at my wife.
Fighting the reluctant controls, Captain Cameron's strength is being pushed to the limit.
"797, the tower has you in sight."
Squinting through the smoke, the crew of Flight 797 land hard. At 20 minutes after 7, the Air Canada plane is on the ground. It's less than 30 minutes since the first sign of any trouble on board Flight 797.
When we touch the ground, I assume that we're safe now. Now let's get out of this airplane.
But inside the plane, the smoke isn't letting up. Passengers are undoing their seatbelts and trying desperately to escape.
I got up out of my seat, and I remember putting my hands up on someone's back, and it was like waiting in a line. And I knew that was one line. I didn't want to wait very long. So I turned around and went the other direction, not knowing I was actually heading towards the front of the plane.
Sergio Bonetti is the first one to the door. He helps gasping passengers escape. The cabin is pitch black and burning hot. In the cockpit, the crew quickly shuts the plane down. The first officer escapes through the emergency window. It's a 5-meter jump to the ground. Passengers have opened 3 of the overwing exits. But even with the doors open, the exits are all but invisible. The smoke is too thick.
I saw a light, and it was the door that had opened. Someone had opened the door. I realized what it was, ran to the door, and held my head. I just put my face out so I could breathe.
Passengers who have found the exits slide off the wing and stumble to safety. On the ground, Laura Kayama and Judy Davidson frantically move passengers away from the deadly plane. Fire rescue vehicles surround the plane. They douse the plane's exterior and the ground beneath with foam, fearing a fuel fire or worse, an explosion. Through the cockpit window, Ouimet can see Captain Cameron sitting in his seat looking dazed and slumped towards the wheel.
First thing that got my attention was to see Don's face in the window and realize that he was not completely conscious.
I couldn't get out of my seat. I'd start and I'd get my arse up in the air or like that, and I'd be pushed back by I have no idea, it was an invisible force, but it was probably smoke and fire.
Desperately trying to save the captain's life, Ouimet tells firefighters to cover him with foam.
It was this soapy, ice-cold mixture that drenched me.
It works. Cameron stirs and climbs out through the cockpit window.
Stop! There he is! Stop!
Barely 90 seconds have passed since the plane landed, when suddenly the whole interior of Flight 797 ignites. The flames roll through the cabin like a train. Captain Donald Cameron is the last person to get out of the plane alive.
We knew there were people in the airplane, unfortunately, at that point. That was finished.
The cabin fire breaks through the top of the fuselage. Black smoke can be seen for kilometers. Flight attendant Laura Kayama begins to count.
I will remember these words forever. She told us to line up so that she could count the survivors. If there were survivors, obviously they were dead.
Including the crew, there had been 46 people aboard the plane. But there aren't 46 people on the runway.
I really thought that if the pilot could land the plane, we would all get off. But I knew when I looked around, I didn't think we were all there.
The passengers who escaped the plane suffer from smoke inhalation and minor injuries, but most are not badly hurt.
It was almost like if you got off the plane, nothing was wrong. I mean, there was maybe a sprained ankle, maybe someone had a broken arm or something. You made it and you were completely fine, or you didn't make it.
The young man next to me that helped me with my breathing techniques didn't survive. That was a real tough blow, because I know, for one, I believe he played a big part in my survival.
I guess it was around midnight. I decided to call Air Canada. I said, I'm trying to find out if a friend of mine was on this flight in Cincinnati. And she said, are you a member of the family? I said, no, I'm just a close friend. And she said, do you know if his wife is alone? And I said, well, yes. And she said, well, she may need somebody with her.
Stan Rogers, the rising musical star, didn't make it off the plane.
Cincinnati ground. This is Captain of the Air Canada flight that's on fire here.
Captain Cameron radios Cincinnati ground control from an emergency vehicle near his plane. He has a sobering message.
It seems there are 23 people left on board the aircraft. Is there a scheduled carrier runs into here that could maybe give aid and shelter to our stranded passengers? It's pretty cold out here.
What began with a simple electrical problem has taken the lives of 23 people. What caused the deadly fire? What went so horribly wrong? The investigation will uncover the plane's troubling history. This DC-9 had another serious accident just a few years before. In June of 1983, a strange smell in the back of an Air Canada DC-9 quickly turned into an all-out emergency. For 15 minutes, passengers and crew struggled to deal with thick, toxic smoke as it rolled through the plane. Flight 797 made a remarkable landing, only to burst into flames 90 seconds later. "23 people didn't escape the plane. Now the burnt shell of the DC-9 sits on the runway at the Greater Cincinnati Airport. It's one of the most disturbing airplane disasters in years. Within the hour, investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board are on the scene. The first grim task of the investigators is to recover the bodies of the dead. 21 Canadians and 2 Americans. Many are burned beyond recognition. Almost all of the victims are found in the front half of the plane, between the wings and the cockpit. Some are still strapped into their seats. Others are found in the aisles. And even though all the passengers had been moved up earlier in the flight, 2 bodies are found near the rear, beyond the wings.
Because of the dense smoke in the cabin, the passengers couldn't see well enough to find the exits. And 2 passengers went beyond the overwing exits and succumbed to the environment.
Investigators take blood samples from the bodies. They find deadly levels of certain chemicals that were produced as the plane burned.
When we did toxicological studies, we were able to determine that there were some significant high levels of cyanide and fluoride in the blood, as well as carbon monoxide.
It's not known if the toxic fumes killed the passengers. All that's certain is that they were unable to escape before the flames tore through.
When I went on board, I was just struck by the acrid smell. It was kind of eerie because there was a lot of fire damage. A lot of the fuselage was burned. You know, the interior of the cabin was burned down to the tops of the seats.
With the bodies removed, investigators begin digging through the wreckage to try and find the cause of the fire. Among them are members of the FBI.
They were investigating to determine whether terrorism might have been a factor, so they were on scene right away looking at the aircraft to make that determination.
The FBI examines pieces of the plane's floor, samples of water from the washroom, even a plastic vial found on the floor.
The FBI became involved very early because of the possibility of a crime taking place takes precedent over a accident. They were looking for anything that would have to do with an incendiary device or small explosive device or anything that could be fused to start a fire. They determined that there was no evidence of any crime being committed. It was probably accidental ignition, and so they then left and NTSB took over the accident.
Having discounted the possibility that the fire was deliberately set, investigators consider the next obvious cause: a cigarette. When smoking on planes was still allowed, the most common source of fires in a washroom was the trash container. Investigators examine the trash container and find that the top is burned away, but the trash chute and the container behind and below the sink are intact. Inside the container are remnants of paper, scorched but not burned. The fire could not have started here. With the most obvious potential causes discounted, investigators begin to comb through the wreckage looking for what had started the fire. Studying the history of the plane, Hill uncovers some startling facts. In the year before the accident, 76 separate maintenance issues had been written up in the plane's logbook. All were dealt with, but still, it's an unusually high number of problems. The plane's troubled history didn't end there. 4 years earlier, the rear bulkhead had failed, causing an explosive decompression. The crew had to make an emergency landing.
It knocked out a lot of electrical cable and hydraulics and stuff like that, and the guy did a hell of a job bringing it back to Boston.
The plane was repaired and put back into service, but Hill focuses on the wires that had to be stitched together after the accident. A bad repair job could have been the cause of the fire.
There were wires that ran through there that had been cut, spliced back together.
Investigators study all the wire splices they can find on Flight 797 that weren't destroyed in the fire, but they find no evidence of arcing or short-circuiting. It's another dead end. Investigators turn their attention to the cockpit voice recorder and the popping circuit breakers.
What was that? It's right there, I see it. Right there.
Yeah.
Like a machine gun. Yeah. Zap, zap, zap.
The circuit breakers trip as a precaution. When they begin to overheat, the circuit breakers turn off, cutting electrical current to the motor. It's a safety feature, so the motor won't cause a fire.
Pops as I push it.
Investigators need to know if the breakers were tripped by a fire that had already started, or was the motor itself the problem? The NTSB build a mock-up of the plane's washroom and force the flush motor to seize. They want to see if it could have started the fire. The seized motor reaches a temperature of 428 degrees Celsius. It's hot, but it's not hot enough to ignite parts of the washroom around the motor. As they listen to the cockpit voice recorder, investigators uncover a puzzling clue. 3 minutes before the circuit breakers popped, the recorder picked up another noise. It was the sound of electrical arcing, like static, repeated 8 times. The noises weren't audible to the crew. Hidden from view on any airplane is a river of wiring. Investigators focus on a cable coming from a generator below the washroom floor. Insulation had rubbed off 2 wires, making it possible for sparks to be produced, sparks that could start a fire.
There was evidence that there was some electrical arcing, but it could have occurred after the insulation had burned on those wires.
In spite of countless hours of investigation and numerous tests, in the end, the NTSB can't pinpoint the exact cause of the fire. There simply isn't enough evidence.
Just because of the vast amount of damage that was done in that concentrated area around the lavatory where the fire burnt for a long period of time and possibly destroyed any of the evidence of where the fire actually ignited.
Even if they'll never know the exact cause of the fire, investigators try to understand how it could cause so much damage. There had been heat and smoke, but no one had seen any flames until an explosion ripped through the jet.
When you have a fire that has incomplete combustion, when it has a lack of oxygen, they will produce combustible gases. Those gases then can collect, especially in the crown of an aircraft.
The fire had burned out of sight behind the washroom walls, and the smoke, hot gases and fumes intensified and spread inside the wall space from the washroom through to the cabin walls. Those spaces acted as a sort of chimney for the gases and smoke that the fire was creating. Although the fire remained concealed behind the walls and ceiling panels, the smoke and hot gases entered the cabin through every seam, gathering in the upper space in the cabin and pressing down on the passengers.
The inaccessible areas and the cabin area are all linked together through small cracks and crevices and small openings. The plane is one big pressure vessel with everything being the same, equilibrated to the same pressure. So smoke and gases in those areas would fairly quickly start to permeate into the passenger cabin.
When the doors were opened during the evacuation, an unlimited supply of oxygen was suddenly available to feed the fire. The more intense the heat, the more oxygen-hungry a fire becomes. The gas is ignited with the force of an explosion.
And once you have a flashover, you produce heat, toxic gases, and you burn up all the oxygen in the cabin, and it becomes non-survivable.
The technical part of the investigation is complete. But but there are still a lot of questions about how the crew responded to the fire.
The first officer says it's starting to clear now, and at that point I reckoned that the fire was under control.
Could they have done more to prevent the tragedy on board Flight 797? In 1983, a washroom fire on an Air Canada DC-9 filled the plane's cabin with smoke. The crew struggled to land the plane, but a flash fire ripped through the jet moments after it came to a stop. 23 people were killed.
There was a fireman hollering at us. I think the quote was, "She could blow at any minute."
NTSB investigators are unable to definitively pinpoint the cause of the fire. But after reviewing all the information they have, they're ready to release their report. The report on the lethal fire aboard Air Canada Flight 797 is published a year after the accident. It's a landmark in aircraft safety, but it immediately makes for controversial headlines. The NTSB points out that the source of the smoke was never identified, either by the flight attendants or the first officer. The captain was never told, nor did he inquire as to the precise location and extent of the fire which had been reported to him.
And with that in mind, what type of fire did you believe that you had?
The bin fire.
Mayday, Mayday, Mayday.
And the report asks a hypothetical question.
Canada 797, we have a fire on board. We are going down.
Can you possibly make Cincinnati?
Roger that.
If he'd begun to descend sooner, could the captain have landed at Standiford Field Airport in Louisville, Kentucky? It was a few minutes closer. The report and the media attention it gets are devastating to Captain Cameron and his crew. Soon after the report is released, there's an outcry among pilots in the industry. They resent its implied criticism of Flight 797's crew and the suggestion that they could have begun their descent 5 minutes sooner. Several months later, the Airline Pilots Association submits a petition that defends Cameron and the crew. It makes an impact. The NTSB release a revised report, including the petition by the Airline Pilots Association. In the petition, First Officer Ouimet writes an impassioned defense of landing the plane where and when they did. The issue wasn't only the distance to the nearest airport, but the required rate of descent. As it was, the plane barely made the descent to the greater Cincinnati airport. Still, the National Transportation Safety Board's revised summary doesn't pull all its punches, pointing a finger at Captain Cameron. The report states that the time taken to evaluate the nature of the fire and to decide to initiate an emergency descent contributed to the severity of the accident. 20 years later, the statement still stings.
I'm glad they were all, the people that got off. I'm very sorry that the people that didn't get off, because we spent a lot of time and effort getting them there. That really bothered me. All I know is that I did the best I could.
Along with the comments on the performance of the crew, the NTSB recommends a host of safety improvements. Perhaps if the flight had been full, someone would have noticed the smell of smoke sooner. But what the washroom of Flight 797 could have used was a smoke detector. They weren't standard throughout the industry, but after Flight 797, attitudes and regulations changed. Even though flight attendants did receive some training in dealing with fires aboard a plane, it didn't go far enough. But what was more obvious, the flight attendants weren't properly equipped to attack fires. Without full face masks and oxygen, they couldn't be expected to fight fire while holding their breath. In the years after Flight 797, attendants received better equipment and training. The cabin crew had also made split-second decisions that helped save lives. Moving passengers further up the plane and handing out wet towels minimized the effects of the toxic smoke. Their decision to tell passengers to open the emergency exits over the wings was not standard procedure, but it let some passengers escape more quickly and was eventually adopted as a routine practice. Finally, it became obvious from the location of some of the bodies that passengers died because of precious seconds lost trying to find the exits in the pitch dark. What would have made a difference? Track lighting on the floors and bumps along the overhead bins that identified the rows with emergency exits. Features that would eventually become standard.
As a direct result of 797, a number of rules were changed, including a more stringent test for seats, a heat release and smoke requirement for cabin interior panels, requirement for smoke detectors in lavatories, and Halon fire extinguishers in the cabin.
We're going to be making an emergency landing. Put your head on your lap. Stay in that position.
But the changes were too late for those who died on Flight 797, like the man sitting beside Connie Kirsch. Months after the crash, his wife tracked Connie down.
She said, I just understand my husband was the one that was next to you, and I just wanted to know how was he? What was his spirits? And I said, he was in great spirits. He's very nice. He let me sit next to him and explained to me how to breathe. That was really difficult, you know, and the guilt that I carried for a long time was difficult. But I'm past the guilt, but I guess when you go back to it and you think about it like this in detail, you're right back there.
Stan Rogers was another victim of Flight 797. He would never be able to fulfill the promise of his life and growing career.
I loved his generosity and his loyalty as a friend. As an artist, he was perhaps one of the best songwriters this country's ever produced, and it was really an incredible pleasure and honor to be working with him. He still gets lots and lots of airplay, and so his legend grows.
Sometime after the accident, 2 Air Canada employees show up at Diane Fatley's door in Dallas.
They brought my Bible. It's dark because it was burned and singed, but it's a paperback Bible, and it did not completely burn up. This is just a reminder to me that God was with me. And I believe He protected me, and you know, He was there with me.
Captain Cameron and his crew eventually received 6 separate awards for their heroic actions on Flight 797, including recognition from the Royal Canadian Air Force. But they're all still haunted by the nightmare.
You feel responsible, there's no question. You feel guilt, you're willing to give your license. You feel very, very small until you get all the facts together, and because it's a puzzle for you, you know, you're as much as a victim in this. You're not supposed to fly an airplane in that condition, you know, so you're as much as a victim as the passenger, and I think it becomes all of our problem, and we're all part of the solution.
It's just a shame we didn't get everybody off. It still bothers me.
A 737 is in trouble. The pilots blinded by rain. In the cabin, government officials and influential businessmen. The crash of IFO-21 shocks the world. Did a final act of war bring the plane down? The White House demands answers. This was no ordinary flight, but a military jet carrying American politicians. When the investigation is over, the Air Force itself is held responsible. Wednesday, April the 3rd, 1996. A raw spring day near the city of Dubrovnik, Croatia. Rain pelts the runway at the city's airport. A small group of diplomats hurry through the storm, trying to keep dry. They're part of a delegation that's just touched down. Among them, the Croatian Prime Minister and the American ambassador to the region, Peter Galbraith.
The flight into Dubrovnik was a scary flight. We couldn't see anything at all. At that point, I'd been ambassador to Croatia for nearly 3 years, and I'd done a lot of shuttle diplomacy, and it certainly was one of the most uncomfortable.
The weather that made Galbraith's landing so bad isn't letting up. In fact, commercial flights into Dubrovnik have been cancelled. But the ambassador and the others aren't waiting for a commercial flight. They're here to greet IFO-21, a US Air Force jet on a delicate mission. The plane is a specially designed 737. The Air Force has a small fleet of these jets to transport high-profile guests around the world. The cabin has everything needed to do business and politics 10,000 meters in the sky. Today, the cabin is filled with what the military call DVs, Distinguished Visitors. This group is led by United States Secretary of Commerce, Ron Brown.
Ron Brown was a very smooth, capable individual. He was a Washington insider. And he had all the skills that go with that.
Brown is a star in the Democratic Party.
I obviously will do everything that is possible.
He played an important role in getting Bill Clinton elected president. Under Clinton, Brown was appointed the first African-American Commerce Secretary in the country's history.
The United States companies that are here today are eager to engage in dialogue with government and business leaders, and more importantly, to do business.
Today, that job has taken Brown to one of the most troubled areas in the world. For 4 years, civil war ripped Bosnia and Croatia apart. But just a few months ago, an uneasy peace began. As Commerce Secretary, Brown is helping to rebuild the local economy.
Ambassador thinks we should.
The philosophy behind it was that the peace would not be durable unless there was economic progress in the region, that was really critical to the peace.
Brown's 3-day tour started that morning in Tuzla, Bosnia, where the group toured an electrical plant and ate hamburgers with American troops stationed there.
Being a former Army man myself, I know what being away from home is like, so we thought we would bring a little bit of home to you.
The final stop on today's tour is the ancient coastal city of Dubrovnik. Before the war, it was a vital part of the country's tourism industry.
It was my idea that Ron Brown should go to Dubrovnik. The Croatians were very eager to get the word out that Dubrovnik was still standing and that it was still a tourist destination. So I thought it would be very useful to have Ron Brown and the delegation go there.
But on this damp day, Dubrovnik is not at its best, or even visible. Fog presses down from the sky, obscuring the city and the beautiful Adriatic coast. To the north of Dubrovnik flies IFO-21. Its pilot is Captain Ashley J. Davis. His colleagues call him AJ.
Departure, IFO-21.
IFO-21.
From the cockpit, Davis can see some clouds ahead that he wants to avoid.
I'm left here just a couple of miles for a build-up.
IFO-21, this is approved as requested. Climb and maintain flight level 160.
Up to 160 now. IFO-21.
It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. AJ Davis and his crew have been on the go since dawn. While the cabin of this plane is built for comfort, the cockpit is virtually identical to a standard issue 737. AJ Davis grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and dreamed of being a pilot. He made it and has been on the front line of American military efforts. In the past, he flew Midair refuelers high above the Persian Gulf. But now he pilots diplomats and other officials from around the world. It means a lot of traveling and a lot of time away from his wife and 2 children at Ramstein, an American base in Germany. According to the Air Force ranks, Shelley Kelly is a technical sergeant. Today on IFO-21, her main job is to make sure the passengers have everything they need.
Mr. Secretary, something to eat.
No, thank you. I was wondering how our time's looking.
The diplomats are expecting to arrive in Dubrovnik by mid-afternoon, but they've been running late all day.
I can check to find out for sure if you'd like.
Yeah, thank you. Early would be good.
As the plane nears Dubrovnik, AJ Davis calls the United States Air Force Weather Service for an update.
Metro, IFO-21, how copy? Over.
IFO-21, copy loud and clear. Weather for Lima Delta uniform as follows. Rain. Sky conditions 500, broken. That would be ceiling. How well do you copy?
Metro, IFO-21, copies. Yeah, we've been in it all day. Are you expecting any changes in the weather?
Pretty much continued rain, over.
Copy. Rain. Thanks for your help. So, let's see the sights of Dubrovnik.
Only 4 months after a peace treaty was signed, the skies over this part of the world aren't guaranteed to be friendly. Planes are still required to fly in certain highly restricted lanes. While he's aware that there are flight restrictions, Davis has never flown in this part of the world before. As he nears the Croatian border, he gets an unexpected warning.
IFO-21, this is Magic 5-1.
Magic is the call sign for the peacekeeping airborne early warning aircraft that watches air corridors like a traffic cop.
Be advised, you're leaving an approved corridor. Please reroute immediately.
Davis isn't off course. He's flying the exact route he had planned. But without knowing it, Davis and his plane are flying out of approved airspace. They're flying into potentially dangerous territory.
You're leaving an approved corridor. Reroute.
Roger, Magic. Our error. Rerouting now to proper corridor. Over. The second time today.
The approved corridors do change, and Davis and his crew should have been informed. To stay on an approved course, Davis will have to swing out to the west. It's an embarrassing situation that's going to cost them time.
Shelley, AJ, we've been directed to reroute. We'll be arriving about 15 minutes late at Dubrovnik. Apologies to all back there.
Ladies and gentlemen, could I have your attention, please? Unfortunately, there will be a slight delay on our arrival into Dubrovnik.
DVs aren't going to be happy at all. That weather ahead will probably slow us down even more.
Outside his plane, the heavy rain continues to crash down. Flying toward an unfamiliar airport with a cabin full of businessmen and diplomats, Davis has a difficult task ahead. What happens to this plane and its passengers over the next several hours will capture the attention of the world. A heavy rain soaks a small airport in Dubrovnik, Croatia. Headed towards it is a US Air Force 737 carrying 35 people on a trade mission. Leading the delegation, US Secretary of Commerce Ron Brown.
We'll see which path Ambassador thinks we should follow.
Dubrovnik approach, IFO 21, level 100.
Dubrovnik approach, good afternoon. Maintain 10,000 feet for beacon approach. Runway 12.
Okay, descending to 10,000 feet, IFO 21.
The weather is so bad today that commercial flights have been cancelled. As they approach the airport, the rain isn't letting up. But the crew is dealing with more than just bad weather. The recent civil war has taken a heavy toll on Dubrovnik's airport. It had been closed for several years and is waiting for a new landing system.
The airport was totally trashed by the Serbs who had taken over the airport during the '91 war. They really went out of their way for the destruction. They destroyed the instrument landing system. The new one was on order.
Around the world, airports use sophisticated technology to help planes take off and land. Doppler radar warns of incoming storms. Glide slopes help pilots stay on course to land. The devastated Dubrovnik airport has none of that. It doesn't even have radar to see the planes that are coming in for landing. Instead, the airport is using so-called non-directional beacons to guide planes towards the runway. In the aviation world, it's ancient technology.
There are many non-directional beacons used in the United States and throughout the world, but they're an older navigational aid, and in fact, they were on the way out.
The system in Dubrovnik has 2 beacons on the ground, which send out signals to the plane. When the crew receives the signals, they consult their charts and follow the course that will take them to the airport. The crew of IFO 21 is still waiting to hear the first signal when they get a call from the ground.
9A CRO to IFO 21.
IFO 21, I read you, 9A CRO, over.
Another plane, this one carrying Ambassador Galbraith, had touched down earlier in Dubrovnik. The pilot of that plane is an experienced flyer who's very familiar with the area. He wants to let the crew know what to expect.
IFO 21, we landed about an hour ago. The weather was at minimum.
Adjusting the wording to split if you have to execute the missed approach. Over.
Roger, 9A CRO, we read you. Out.
Diverting wouldn't be welcome news for the members of the trade delegation.
The pressures to get the passengers to scheduled news conferences and other activities were probably pretty high.
As Davis closes in on the airport, the Dubrovnik Tower calls again.
IFO 21. Report level.
IFO 21, 5,000.
IFO 21, roger. Descend to 4,000. Report Kilo Lima Papa.
Down to 4,000, IFO 21.
Sir. Thank you.
Flying above the storm, the crew finally hears the radio signal from the first beacon.
Engage. At Kilo Lima Papa, we're tracking outbound at 119 degrees.
119 confirmed.
Mr. Secretary, we're landing.
We'll take this up later, Adam.
It's not very broken up down there. I can't see through it. Tim?
The clouds are thick. The crew can't see the ground. They have to trust their instruments as they descend through the storm.
IFO 21. Sir, we are inside the locator, inbound.
IFO 21, roger. Cleared for beacon approach. Runway is wet.
IFO 21.
A.J. Davis flies blind through heavy rain and cloud cover. He expects to see the airport any second.
IFO 21, do you read?
Just before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Dubrovnik Tower loses all contact with IFO 21.
IFO 21, Dubrovnik approach, do you read? IFO 21, do you read?
Without approach radar to track the plane, controllers have no idea where it is. Perhaps the plane has diverted to another airport.
IFO 21, do you read?
But as the minutes stretch on with no word from the American plane, local controllers are taking no chances.
Initiate emergency procedures.
Near the end of our shift, we heard about the possibility of a missing plane. We didn't know who was on the plane. We had no details about the flight. For situations like this, there is a certain procedure, and we just waited for more information.
Peter Galbraith is waiting at the airport with Croatia's Prime Minister.
It was clear from my own flight in that this was a very marginal landing. I did not expect them to attempt the landing in Dubrovnik. The Croatian Prime Minister came up to me and pulled me aside. He said, "We've lost radio contact with Ron Brown's plane." I got the State Department Operations Center on the phone, and he's asked to activate the U.S. military to start search and rescue activities.
Word goes out to the chain of air traffic control centers.
Američke borbene snage. Jeste li imali nekakav kontakt s tim zrakoplovom?
But no one has had any contact with IFO 21. The search and rescue effort focuses on the approach to the airport. Perhaps the plane had ditched into the Adriatic.
At the time, I was about 100 miles away. I was in Brindisi, Italy. We launched 2 of our MH-53 helicopters with Special Tactics Air Force personnel on board, headed to Dubrovnik.
For hours, there is no sign of the missing aircraft. The weather conditions are getting worse.
Fog was in. thunderstorms in the area, low visibility.
IFO-21 Dubrovnik approach, do you read?
IFO-21 has a CPI, or crash position indicator, on board.
IFO-21, do you read?
If the plane went down, the CPI should be sending out an ultra-high frequency signal.
IFO-21.
But the Dubrovnik airport, as well as lacking radar, does not have the equipment to pick up the signal.
IFO-21 Dubrovnik approach, do you read? IFO-21, do you read? IFO-21, do you read?
As the hours pass, poor visibility frustrates the searchers.
They arrived off the coast, and they were over water looking for the crash.
Hours after the plane disappears, police respond to a tip. A local villager has seen something on the hill above his house. It's a long way from the coast where the search is concentrated.
We went up with 2 vehicles to check the mountains. The weather was extremely horrible, strong rain and thick fog. So we went on foot for about an hour up that mountain. Then we came close.
It's almost 7:30 at night, 4.5 hours after the crew called for clearance to land. The crash of IFO-21 is finally confirmed. The news races from Dubrovnik to America.
The crash site has been reached by Croatian police, and I've just received word that there's also a Croatian doctor on the scene.
The tail section is the only substantial piece of IFO-21 that's left. Debris and bodies are scattered across the mountain.
These were hard moments as we were walking over the boulders, not knowing if we're going to step on someone's body. These are the moments that you can't forget.
Then, almost miraculously, police make a heartening discovery. Inside the tail section, they find a survivor. It's Technical Sergeant Shelley Kelly.
As we arrived at the tail section, one policeman went inside and found the body of a stewardess, and he tried to help. That was our hope. We wanted to help. We wanted to save every life, and hers was our chance. We were counting on it.
In the darkness, they realize that Kelly needs immediate medical attention if she's going to survive.
When I realized that there was no one to help, I radioed the police central station in Dubrovnik and got them the location of the crash site. By then, it was completely dark.
St. John's Hill is alive with close to 100 Croatian policemen and military. American forces are also rushing to the scene. Enormous rocks and treacherous conditions make the wreck site difficult to reach. But there are also remnants of the recent war. Mike Canavan is in charge of the U.S. crash recovery operation.
I met a Croatian major. He told me that he was going to be the guide that would take us up to the top of the mountain. And at that time, he happened to mention that there were several minefields between where we were and the crash site.
It takes almost 2 hours for Canavan to finally make it up the rocky hill.
We had been walking for some time, and it was very dark. And all of a sudden, I saw something that was darker, and I didn't know what it was. And I reached out, and it was an aircraft engine.
On top of the hill, the weather is making it impossible for helicopters to land. Emergency workers can't wait for the weather to clear. They have to get Technical Sergeant Kelly off the mountain immediately. She has a broken spine and other severe injuries. But if she can be kept alive, rescuers hope she can shed some light on what went wrong. With Kelly off the mountain, the search for other survivors continues. Finally, in the darkness, rescue workers find the body of Ron Brown, the U.S. Commerce Secretary. In fact, as rescuers continue to comb the hillside, all they find are bodies. A.J. Davis and the rest of the crew were probably killed instantly. All the other members of the trade delegation are also killed. As dozens of emergency workers continue their grim search, a call comes from Dubrovnik. Technical Sergeant Shelley Kelly is pronounced dead in the ambulance en route to hospital. No one has survived the crash of IFO 21. A grim spring rain hammers down on the mountains of Croatia. Near the Dubrovnik airport, a 737 has crashed. The jet was an American Air Force's plane on a trade mission through the region. Police and members of the military have searched for survivors, but all 35 people who were on the flight are now dead. Including the American Secretary of Commerce, Ron Brown. In the darkness, the rescuers begin a very different job. Mike Canavan is with the U.S. Special Forces.
Once we realized there were no survivors, the mission changes. It goes from, there's no one to rescue. Now, you have to recover remains.
By dawn, the weather has improved. Peter Galbraith gets his first glimpse of the crash site.
We walked up the mountain. The weather was somewhat better. And near the top, there was the fuselage of the plane, rear part of it, and debris all over the place. And then on the other side of the ridge were the bodies. There's nothing in the world that compares to a plane crash.
The one thing that my folks did on the mountain and then down in Dubrovnik is they did this with dignity and respect. And I thought it was done exceptionally well.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice President and the First Lady and the members of Cabinet and I wanted to come here to be with the employees of the Commerce Department at this very difficult hour. Hillary and I have just come from Ron Brown's home, visiting with Alma and Michael and their family and friends who are there.
As the truth sets in, the hard questions begin. How had a specially redesigned U.S. Air Force 737 crashed on a hillside in Croatia? Was it simply bad weather? Or in a war-ravaged part of the world, was there another cause?
Purpose of the accident investigation team, I can guarantee you that they will be extremely thorough in their analysis in trying to determine the causes of this accident.
Because of the high-profile nature of the passengers, rumors begin swirling immediately. Howard Swansea is one of dozens of experts assigned to the team.
In every accident, there's always a lot of speculation. In this particular case, you had a high-ranking U.S. government official. And so by the time we had even got to the crash site, there was just quite a bit of media attention around it. And there were fragments, pieces of aircraft miles away from the wreckage. So my idea was to get as much information or collect as much artifacts or physical evidence as I could.
Right from the start, the investigation team is at a disadvantage. They discover that there's no cockpit voice recorder or flight data recorder on the plane. What's standard for passenger jets is not required in the Air Force.
I had assumed that the Air Force and these VIP flights had higher safety standards than commercial flights. And so I was really shocked to learn that the standards were generally lower than those for commercial aviation.
Without the standard tools, investigators can't afford to overlook anything. The wreck is almost 3 kilometers from the airport. How did a trained crew get so far off course? As Swansea examines the wreckage, Nelson Spornheimer is brought in to look at other evidence. An expert in aerial navigation, he plots the plane's doomed final minutes. To trace the last moments of the flight, he turns to the sky and the US Air Force radar plane, which had been patrolling the region.
IFO-21, this is Magic 5-1. Be advised, you're leaving an approved corridor. Please reroute immediately.
Rerouting now to proper corridor. Over.
Apart from heading out of approved airspace, Spornheimer finds nothing unusual about the plane's flight until the end.
The radar track that I was given was from an AWACS aircraft and showed that the en route portions of the flight from about 100 miles prior to the airport were entirely nominal.
The last segment of the flight, however, beginning 20 kilometers from the airport, is different. On their final approach, the plane begins to head off course. They start flying in a straight line, which heads right into the mountains.
My initial look at the flight track of the aircraft showed a 7-degree bearing error in the final segment of the approach.
A small error when traveling at hundreds of kilometers an hour could quickly lead to an enormous problem. But why would the plane get off course at the end of the trip if the rest of the flight showed no major navigational problems? Even in bad weather, how had the crew become so lost? Spornheimer examines the outdated navigational equipment at the airport. Badly damaged during the recent war, perhaps it had malfunctioned. 2 separate navigational beacons are used for landing in Dubrovnik. One guides planes to the runway, the other lets them know if they've gone too far. The first is located on nearby Kolosep Island. It transmits a specific Morse code signal to make it easily identifiable. When they hear it, all Davis and his crew need to do is fly a heading specified on their landing charts. If they do, they should eventually arrive at the airport. The second beacon is located at the airport itself. It's a fail-safe device. If the crew hears the beacon before they see the airport, they have to declare a missed approach and circle around to try landing again. In fact, the plane that brought Peter Galbraith to Dubrovnik just minutes before IFO-21 only landed on its second attempt.
IFO-21, I read you, 9ACRO, over.
Adjusting the verdict to
Split if you have to execute the missed approach.
over.
Roger, 9ACRO, we read you. Out.
But after studying the equipment, Spornheimer doesn't believe it played a role in the crash.
Both the non-directional beacons were found to be operating normally by flight tests within a few days after the accident.
There are bizarre rumors of an even more sinister theory. Perhaps Davis was following a decoy beacon put in the mountains on purpose. In a troubled region, was this an attack on the trade mission?
To get a signal that is strong enough to be heard, you have to have a very large ground system, which is difficult to establish in rocky, sandy soil. So it would be very expensive and very time-consuming to set up an NDB in the mountains.
Such an elaborate scheme would be nearly impossible to pull off. No evidence is ever found of a decoy beacon. The investigation continues. In the wreckage of the Air Force flight, investigators discover an important piece of the puzzle. The plane's ADF, or automatic direction finder, is recovered. It appears to be working, but only one of the units had been installed on this jet. To perform a proper landing in Dubrovnik, a plane requires 2 ADFs. The device listens to the signals put out by the land-based beacons, but it can only listen to one at a time.
We're still not past it. I'm tuning back to KLP.
Flying with 1 ADF, the crew can listen to either the beacon which is telling them how to get to the airport, or the beacon which is telling them they've gone too far. They can't do both at the same time.
That would have required 2 ADF receivers in the aircraft, which the accident aircraft had only 1. And only having 1 ADF restricted their ability to follow the approach accurately.
I got CV. We're still not past it. I'm tuning back to KLP.
By quickly tuning back and forth between the 2 beacons, the crew can use 1 ADF to listen to 2 signals. But it would have added stress to an already difficult landing. And it's another surprise. The Air Force jet wasn't adequately equipped to land at this airport.
You're talking in a very short time span of making the approach. It's going to become rather difficult in trying to dial both to keep listening to the code if you're also trying to search for your course and headings.
As he continues to study the path that IFO 21 took, Nelson Spornheimer focuses on an S-shaped curve in the plane's flight. It's the sort of path a plane would take when looking for a signal from a non-directional beacon. But just when the crew should be looking for the beacon signal, the S-turns disappear.
At about 2 or 3 miles inside the final approach fix, for the next 7 or 8, 9 miles, the flight track is perfectly straight.
Instead of trusting the navigational system that was in place, even though it was primitive, the crew suddenly seems to give up. And Spornheimer thinks he knows why. Fighting heavy rain and hampered by a single direction finder, Spornheimer believes the crew resorted to another, even older piece of technology to find the runway, something called INS, or Inertial Navigation System.
An INS system uses gyroscopes to maintain an awareness of how much the airplane turns and banks.
After entering a specific geographical position at the beginning of a flight, an inertial navigation system tracks all the turns a plane makes. It's a self-contained system on the aircraft. But there is a potentially enormous problem. If the gyroscopes don't perfectly calculate every single maneuver of the plane, a pilot can be off course.
It's not very broken up down there. I can't see through it. Tim?
The crew might have thought that switching to this system would help them find their way. But in this case, it might have put the plane dangerously off course.
INS drift in this case was probably, in my view, the primary reason the aircraft ended up where it was.
Investigator Howard Swansea examines the Jeppson approach chart the crew was using as they attempted to land. Hampered by poor visibility and relying on the inertial navigation system, their charts would have been a key aid. But when he takes a closer look at it, he notices something peculiar. A key figure, the minimum descent altitude, isn't accurate. The minimum descent altitude is the height where pilots must be able to see the airport. If you can't see it at that height, you have to abort the landing.
Each country has the responsibility of developing these procedures and then publishing information so that other nationalities as well as their own air crews can fly those approach procedures.
Swansea discovers that the minimum descent altitude on the chart doesn't meet American aviation standards. Given the mountainous terrain, it should have been more than 2,800 feet. But the chart the crew was using said it was just over 2,100 feet. It means that the crew could have flown almost 700 feet lower than experts in the US thought was safe without having to abort the landing. Combined with the other problems the crew was dealing with, the non-standard chart sealed their fate. Struggling to find the airport, they were straining to see through the clouds, assuming they were still safely above the mountains. But why wasn't an Air Force jet properly equipped to land in Dubrovnik? And why didn't the crew have the right landing charts that would have made even a difficult flight safer? The answers are found at an American military base in Germany, with some of the most senior members of the Air Force. In the spring of 1996, a US Air Force jet crashed just outside the airport in Dubrovnik, Croatia. None of the 35 people on board IFO-21 survived. The plane was a specially redesigned 737, but the investigators have found that the crew didn't have the equipment it needed to safely land in the war-ravaged airport, and that the charts they were using weren't up to American aviation standards. To discover why the crew were attempting to land in such difficult circumstances, the investigators question Colonel John Mazurowski. He's the operations group commander for the airlift wing in charge of the flight. His job is to provide transportation for a growing number of distinguished visitors. But these are tight budget times. Mazurowski has been told to do more with less.
What I'd like to talk about now is the Jeppesen approach subject.
One of the major focuses of the investigators is the Jeppesen landing charts the crew were using. The charts, drawn up for most major airports, give crews a vast amount of information, including what to do in the case of a missed approach. But investigator Howard Swansea has already found that these charts were not up to US standards.
The Air Force had a directive that required all procedures in foreign countries to have gone through a US or their evaluation process prior to an Air Force crew being able to fly that approach.
Landing at the Dubrovnik airport had not been approved. The Jeppesen landing charts that did exist for the airport had not been reviewed. It's the reason that Howard Swansea found a difference between what the charts said and what was considered safe by the Defense Department. Mazurowski believed that restricting his planes to approved airports would severely limit some of his missions. It takes time to check all the airports out. He had asked for the review to be waived for some airports, including Dubrovnik.
This Jeppesen approach waiver, What caused you to initiate this?
It just seemed like we had been using these approaches for years. Safety didn't seem to be in question.
But the Defense Department waiver was never granted. The approach for Dubrovnik was never approved. Yet even without the safety clearance, the Air Force continued to land there.
IFO 21, level 100.
Dubrovnik approach, good afternoon.
The airport in Dubrovnik was far below modern standards. The charts used to land there hadn't been checked by the Department of Defense. Nevertheless, senior Air Force officials had decided to permit landing at Dubrovnik and other airports they were flying into.
In fact, none of them have been approved in this time frame.
Not to my knowledge, sir. No.
In the end, a fatal combination of factors had come together to cause the crash of IFO 21.
Dubrovnik approach, IFO 21, level 100.
Dubrovnik approach, good afternoon. Maintain 10,000 feet for beacon approach. Runway 12.
IFO 21.
The crew were fighting bad weather. They were landing in an unfamiliar airport, which was hobbled by old technology. The unapproved charts made a bad situation much worse. After an investigation involving nearly 150 interviews, the final report on the crash of IFO 21 exceeds 7,000 pages.
How much of the weeping we have done this last week because there were so many brilliant young people on that plane with him from different backgrounds and different racial groups. Why? Because Ron Brown could see in them the promise of a new tomorrow.
The results of the investigation fault several individuals and institutions. Dubrovnik Airport is singled out for an improperly designed instrument approach procedure. Today, automatic direction finders are no longer needed to land at Dubrovnik. The airport has replaced its approach equipment with the instrument landing system which was being delivered at the time of the accident.
I got CV.
The final report says A.J. Davis and his cockpit crew are responsible for flight errors. And, like a bullet piercing the heart of Air Force operations, leading military figures are blamed for a failure of command. In the aftermath of the report, 2 senior members of the Air Force are relieved of their posts. The Air Force severely reprimands Colonel John Mazeroski for dereliction of duty. He is demoted and eventually retires as a major. 13 other officers are also singled out for their roles in connection with the crash. The Air Force also changed the way it did business. All military aircraft were ordered to carry flight data recorders and cockpit voice recorders. No aircraft is allowed to fly into an airport without approval from the Department of Defense, not even for high-ranking diplomats.
IFO 21. Sir, we are inside the locator, inbound.
IFO 21, roger. Cleared for beacon approach. Runway is wet.
IFO 21.
The Air Force Command was held accountable for the accident. But it's the pilots, the crew, and the passengers of IFO 21 who paid the ultimate price for oversights made by the 86th Airlift Command.